Hey there, this is Kristen Ruiz, and I'm here with Geneva, Mayne, my co-host, and we have a special guest with us today. Sean Moonsammy is here, and we'll be discussing trauma-informed voice care and responding to trauma through policies. So let me tell you a little bit about Sean, why we're so excited to have him here. So first of all, he is a Guyanese American Indo-Caribbean son of immigrants. He's an opera singer and a speech language pathologist. So you can imagine that we're really excited to talk about his perspective on voice. He earned his bachelor's in opera performance and back-to-back master's degrees in opera and speech language pathology from CUNY Queens College. Sean completed his clinical fellowship at Stony Brook University Hospital, where he now works as a voice specializing speech language pathologist, and partnered with laryngologist Keith Chadwick to launch Long Island's first interdisciplinary gender-affirming voice clinic. He is currently pursuing a doctorate in speech language pathology at MGH. So Sean, we're really excited to have you here.
So excited.
Oh, thanks, y'all. I'm excited to be here.
Nice. Okay, so before we get into everything that we're going to be talking about today, let's start with our first segment, what's new and what's good. And I usually start, so I'll just say I'm really enjoying this low-key end of fall, beginning of winter. I'm enjoying the holiday season, just got a Christmas tree, and I'm waiting for it to the leaves to the branches to fall down so I can decorate it. And I haven't done that, I think, in like 3 or 4 years.
And this is your first Christmas in the new house, right?
Yes. So it's like having a normal life again. I can do like the whole Christmas and the decorations, and there's even a little snowfall and it's sticking up here in northern Westchester. So that's really cool. I'm enjoying that.
Congrats.
And I'm sure it's snowing by you too, Kristen.
Yes, it's very cozy in here, but very chilly outside. And Sean, what's new and what's good with you?
You know, I just finished my semester last week at Massachusetts General. So it's been nice to have this time to just catch up on life and everything. So, my partner and I got engaged about I think it was a month or two ago. So
wow.
Yeah, how horrible am I? I forgot the actual month. So we're just planning our wedding now, and so tomorrow we're going to the courthouse. We're gonna get all the paperwork done, and hopefully by the end of the year, just tie the knot. And
wow, life is really lifing. Wow,
life is lifing. And we're also in the process of looking for homes. It's Geneva, I'm sure we're tailgating, right? So
come to Westchester.
Yeah, I know.
You'll probably go to Long Island, right? Because that's where you work.
Borderline. I don't think I could ever leave Queens or
Gotcha.
Can't go too far from it. So, we'll see.
Nice.
That's awesome. I think what's new and good with me, I love this season. I love the energy. I love the reminders of hope and joy and peace and all those things that we all need. But I had a chance to sing this weekend, and I did a song that I did a bunch of years ago. But when I sang it last time, I was in the middle of re-coordinating a bunch of stuff vocally. And I remember that the last time that I sang it, it was like I did it and I was pleased with it, but it was one of those like, oh dear God, am I going to get through? What's going to happen kind of thing. And to be able to sing it now after going through the process, things stabilize. And it's just an amazing reminder of like trusting process, because to go through it with confidence, I had 4 hours of sleep, so I was exhausted. I'd driven in from Pennsylvania quick it was just a crazy day. So even with sleep, and I don't recommend sleep deprivation and singing, but it was just amazing to see. I remember a time where it was like, oh, is this ever gonna happen? And then to be able to go through it and feel like, oh my gosh, that was so fun. And I think I'm just celebrating like growth and that feeling of, wow, okay, if those hurdles were overcome, what are the next ones? So just feeling possibility, really excited about that.
That's so cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Congrats.
All right. So we're here to kind of get to know Sean a little bit more. So we're going to dig into segment number 2, experience, strength, and hope. It's so good to have you. I got to meet you in person for the first time at ASHA in New Orleans, and I was so looking forward to this conversation, and now we're here. So, can you tell us a little bit about your journey from vocal performance and into speech language pathology, and even some of the things that maybe you experienced culturally or in your family around those things? Because I'm pretty sure neither singing or speech pathology was like gung ho for your family coming from a Caribbean background, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. More so the former. So, I when it all started, like when I was applying to high schools, and in New York we have specialized high schools. And so, there are the big six that, every parent tries to, aim for their children if possible.
Right.
So, they went gun ho. You're going to Stuyvesant, you're going to Bronx Science. Didn't get into any of them, but I did audition for one of those specialized high schools,
Ah,
and it was LaGuardia Performing Arts High School. So it was, I played the piano at the time, so I went in playing Billy Joel, like I don't even remember the song, dun 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 dun. I forgot the name of it. But my parents were just like, you're gonna get in for a piano, just do the piano. And I went in for dance, I went in for drama, I did the whole gamut. Got into everything except for piano. So
that's funny.
yeah, sang Backstreet Boys more than that, so ended up going to LaGuardia for high school. It kind of galvanized me to, just sing more and to just work on my confidence and to explore something I've never even thought a possibility, right? Opera. I had never listened to opera growing up. My parents never didn't know what it was. So they got to experience things. I got to experience things. We would pull in a lot of my cousins to come over to the musicals and to the operettas. So it kind of got their feet wet. And by senior year, I was applying to colleges, and they were just like, what are you going to do? Are you going to go into medicine, go into law, the whole thing? And I told them, I was like, no, I kind of want to do music. I'm kind of good at it. I feel like I have a good support system. I have good training. So I auditioned for a lot of conservatories, and at the time they were just like, really, really reconsider this. And then I ended up getting a gig singing backup for Elton John, during in 2008. And they're kind
That's
of like, oh
amazing.
yeah, it was fun. It was a great experience. I was 18, so it was insane. Like, you don't think about those things at 18. And
Right.
I was at Madison Square Garden for his 60th birthday residency. So my dad knew who he was, so of course he was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, let's do this. He had bragging rights, and so kind of got their whistle wet.
Eventually.
Yes,
Yeah.
eventually. And
Well,
I mean,
Elton John is some good social proof.
good social proof, right? And it's always, it was nice. It was really nice. And then in even when I was in conservatory, I remember, there aren't many Indian people or, West Indian people in operatic performance. And I remember going through the auditions, and I remember being asked, like, are you a citizen? Would we have a problem accepting you here? And I was asked, are you sure? Are you sure you're a citizen? How insane is that? Because I went to schools in New York City my whole life. It never crossed or dawned my mind that this was something to consider, right? And that's my own privilege as an American citizen, right? Gosh, who knows what others experience. But yeah, I'm entering a world of opera where it's not very colored. Colored voices are just now coming to the forefront, and there are still problems there,
And there's
so
a lot of travel too in opera world.
oh yeah, that's why I left, right? So
Okay.
so
I
yeah,
jumped.
so long story short, I went through my bachelor's, I went through my master's, and when I was in my master's in opera performance, I was working with a teacher, Dr. Overholt, who I owe so much to. And Dr. Overholt really spoke to physiology. She spoke to anatomy. kind of got me interested in things that I never thought I would be interested in. And one day I was leaving a rehearsal for, I think, Così fan tutte, Mozart opera. And I called my boyfriend at the time, and I was just like, I don't know if I can continue doing that. I was also on tour during that time. I was doing some work with Josh Groban, and also more bragging rights to my parents, right? Kind of helping me through it all.
Nice.
Social support was there at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of like made me realize I don't know if I can go through this, always on the road, always traveling, carrying multiple outfits in your bag at the time, multiple shoes. God, the shoes are the worst, right? So,
Oh my word.
right? Yes.
I feel like in my experience touring, it was great for that time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then it's time to move
the
on.
time because it's exciting,
For me,
right?
not for everybody, for me, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like my shoes are very heavy. So it was not fun to carry. So anyway, long story short, I didn't know what speech language pathology was at the time, but I remember calling my boyfriend and saying, I'm gonna look into something where I was teaching at the time too, music. I was teaching voice, and I was like, I think I could do this as in rehab or something. I could do this in the hospital. I feel like it's something like this has to exist. So that's how I ended up in speech language pathology. I applied literally right after I graduated with my MM, and the rest is history. So yeah, we could talk about like being colored and in that those both of those societies, right? In opera and speech language pathology, very, very, very similar, although they're so different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So in either setting, did you have experiences of feeling othered, or did you feel like your background was viewed as an asset or a novel contribution, or did you have both of those experiences?
Yeah, more so in speech language pathology, I think, because I was just more much more was happening politically
Mm-hmm.
at the time, right? So I started in 2016.
Ooh.
I started in 2016 with my prereqs. So I
Mm-hmm.
think much more was just highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know if I would have felt that way. I probably would have, honestly, I probably would have. But it's in opera, not so much, aside from that audition I told you about when I was 18, right? But still, then it didn't really register like what was actually happening. But growing up in New York City school public system, like I never experienced it, even in LaGuardia. But definitely in college, in my master's, you definitely hear things that you didn't really tune into at the time. And also as an artist, I feel like my mindset was very different. I was much more loving, accepting, more optimistic. And kind of in a clinical career, you're kind of trained to be more analytical, especially when we're working in the field of communication. I was also very supported with my sister and my boyfriend, who my boyfriend is white, and he has always highlighted things to me that he just never, that I sometimes didn't pick up on, like the way someone would look at me, or the way they would look at us, because us was
Yeah.
visually is striking sometimes.
In terms of your experience of being an Indo-Caribbean in both worlds, you felt like in the speech pathology world it was more viewed as an asset, whereas in the opera world maybe a limitation.
I think so. Yeah. To put it simply, yeah. I think
That's
I talk a
interesting.
lot.
Simply because of the travel experience. This is why I kind of brought it up earlier.
Mhm.
You would think that someone who's had practice integrating into cultures other than their own, and connecting with people in cultures other than their own would be valued in a profession where you do have to sing in other languages, travel all over the place, talk to people from all
It
different
sounds
communities.
logical.
Right?
Right?
But it wasn't viewed as like an asset. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and that's how you have to kind of really understand how so much of modern education, not just vocal performance or music, can be very colonizing and
Mm,
stripping people
mhm.
of their cultures instead of embracing it.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think also colored voices, like, our anatomy is different from the general opera singer, right? And that's going to affect our resonance. So, I think that's something that I just recently, well, not recently, maybe in the last like 3 years, just like I wish I knew that while I was in opera. To know that a bright sound was not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's just anatomy. I have a very high palatal arc, so, and not saying it was a bad thing, but,
Yeah,
having someone judge your voice and not knowing why that would be, right? But now knowing, I think all of us here are informed singers, right? So knowing that, hey, there are things that could be, thought of differently and phrased differently in a way that wouldn't be as traumatic, right?
right. That's
I
Mhm.
think that's
interesting.
really powerful because I think if we could make functional freedom of sound and then letting the artist like interpret the literature using that functionally free instrument, I
Mhm.
wish that that was the bigger deal than, hey, I want you to sound like this obligation that has been put by, I don't even know who the they is sometimes, but making that functional freedom the deal, and then you get to see, hey, what colors come out of your voice as opposed to trying to contort to some preconceived decision about what the sound should be.
I
Yeah.
agree, Kristen. And I feel like, isn't that art? Isn't art?
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, because I think it should be about the expression of the poetry. It should be the expression of the artist collaborating with one another. It shouldn't only be about quality. Now, of course, quality has to be somewhat there, right? But quality should not be universal. It should be expressed at an individual level because that's what art is.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly.
So let me ask you, so other than the traveling, because you saw some really pretty significant success in early on, other than the awareness that there would be a lot of traveling, did those experiences color your view of continuing to be an opera singer, or was it purely just this is the lifestyle that I'm not choosing for myself? Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. So it was not about experiences with color or experiences with any trauma within
Hmm.
the field. I think maybe because I did start so early at a very rigorous state. So I don't know, maybe something was there that helped me through it. But and I think also being gay helps out a little bit, because you kind of build a skin before you even get to a lot
Gotcha.
of the higher level schools. But that's a whole different story. But I think that the majority of it was me wanting to start a family. Seeing that my lifestyle was really tailored to, vocal health and resting.
Rest is good.
What we just spoke about, Kristen, right? So it's
I heard
I,
his
I think
face.
that was more of it,
Yeah.
of the lifestyle.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I have another thought about, your transition. So you started pretty young at LaGuardia, well, like 14, 15.
Mhm. Yeah.
Your time in LaGuardia and your time in Queens University doing um, music studies, did you have any sense of preparation around this is what your life will look like as a performer? Did they talk to you about those kinds of things or no? I'm curious about that.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I remember within conservatory, we were told, to just know how to say, would you like fries with that? And it was the experience of a lot of us. Luckily I was able to supplement my studies with art. So I did photography and I taught piano and voice. But yeah, you have to, there is some kind of mention of it. Um, but yeah, I don't recall it ever being like a formal class or a formal seminar, which would be really helpful, right?
Yes, like, that's one of the things I appreciate about speech pathology now, as opposed to when I started, almost 20 years ago now, is there's way more discussions now about well-being
Mm,
and managing yourself because you're a caregiver And if you're a caregiver, you can't just give and give and give. You have to do the self-care for yourself. And, I'm hearing that more with performers as well. But yeah, if you're going into a profession, I would hope that there would be more coaching around the lifestyle of being within that profession so that people are better prepared and they will be able to sustain that career and not feel like disgruntled or drop out. And I hear this a lot about opera, that in opera, there's so much focus on the development of the art and the craft that there's not enough focus on, okay, business, managing a career, and mentoring in those kinds of areas.
Oh, yeah.
In my experience, even in the other musical genres, it's something very similar, where the focus is on the artistic and musical development. So, and even if they have classes to prepare for auditions, lifestyle, things like that, marketing and all of that, it's very generic, very entrance level. So I work with a lot of graduate and postgraduate singers. And that's one of the complaints that they have. Like, I got out of school, I can sing, now what do I do with this?
Right.
So yeah, that it certainly is a challenge.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, I have a question. I grew up in a place where it was a small town. Everybody looked like me, so I'm kind of like glow in the dark pink. So that's actually what my daughter said. My husband's Puerto Rican, so when she was little, she said, Daddy's tan. She said, I'm coffee. She always said that she was the color of coffee. And she said, and Mommy's pink. So I thought she was gonna say white, but she said pink. So and then I looked down and I was like, oh shoot. Nothing like a
two-year-old kids are so literal.
So like my daughter is biracial, and what I will say is, as somebody who grew up where all the norms look the same, like we all had the same kind of values, not very diverse. Then I moved more downstate. Everything's much more diverse. I end up marrying into a Puerto Rican family, and we live in the city, and everything's like very colorful. But I will say, from things that I experienced earlier and then coming into a more diverse cultural arena, there were things that I had to re-narrate. And so now, as a mother of a biracial child, as she's moving through, my perspective is even more changed, because like, she has a different experience than I have, because of that. So I think that intersectionality of, for her, it's, being a female and then being biracial. She doesn't even always have the boxes that she can check depending on how it's laid out. So I wanted to kind of ask you about, like, you've been so beautifully open and transparent about your perspective based on your intersectionality, the cultural and social issues that impact you. And one of the questions I kind of thought I wanted to ask is, for some people who maybe aren't in a majorly diverse place, but then are in charge of voices, so voice teachers and speech language pathologists and practitioners who are in charge of voices that are very different maybe from their own, what are some insights, or what are some things that you would love for them and us to know based on your perspective? What are you seeing, and what would you love to see?
Yeah, no, that's a really deep, great question, and I wish that I had the perfect answer to it, but I'm going to try to answer it the best that I could. And it's like, in terms of I think when we think about art, like, as voice teachers, and when we think about speech language pathologists who specialize in voice, I think we have to bring it back to just the patient/client, right? Having it be about the art and having it be about the person in front of you. I think that the one thing that I never want to do, whether I'm working with a singing voice or I'm working with a speaking voice in the clinic or in my music studio, I never want to make that person sound like everyone else, right? And I think validating, like, how someone might feel about what's expected of them socially is really important. Whether that's, imposter syndrome, whether that's, I should sound like Maria Callas, right? I think it should be validated, because that's how we start working on, maybe unpacking it and seeing, like, what kind of led to that type of kind of thought process. And I think everyone who is working in outside of a diverse population, metropolitan area or so, should be thinking about just allowing those feelings to come up in the room, but also allowing yourself to work with that patient or client, to work on a voice that's salient for them, right? Work on a voice that expresses art, not expresses quality of the teacher, right? Because who wants that? Who wants to deal with that? And yeah, I wish I could say it better, but I think that it really comes down to who's in front of you.
Yeah, no, this is great because I mean, I've seen things where I mean, I've been in like singing workshops, for instance, if say the majority of the group has had a common musical experience and somebody who hasn't had that same experience, you're using a certain kind of language too. And then that person says, "Oh, what does that mean?" Or, and then everybody's like, "Oh, that means this," like obviously. Or you see them kind of like, well, then they're not going to ask the question because they can tell that there's language going on. So I feel like one of the things that I would love to see is just being sensitive to the idea that each individual has their own biography. And yes, some of the, if there's a dominant group, they're going to have some similar like overlaps, but even within that, there's going to be their own stories, but making sure that the language that we use is welcoming to everybody. I mean, I went to a singing workshop where everybody was like 20 and I was 30 and I was like, I felt like I was 90 and like but the clinician was talking about, like very specific, like this is for young voices, and at 30 I was not that, but it's a weird thing, I know, in this world, but anyway, it was very clear, and all of a sudden I felt the otherness, and as a pink person, like like that was important to feel. And so I think the idea is that and I'm not equating the same, so I want to make sure that that's like super clear, but it's the sense of I saw what it means when somebody in power in the room is making sure that everyone's language and experiences and way of making meaning is valued. I remember thinking, oh, I don't want to be part of that, And so I think the work that you're doing is like, when I read into it, that idea of making a safe space for people to go and work on their voice, which already is vulnerable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, I mean, when like in the clinic that you started, what do you do to make it a safe space for people to come to and work on their voice?
Yeah, I was just talking about this with my laryngologist literally 2 days ago. So, I think the first thing, especially, the clinic that we founded was is focused to gender affirmative care. And I think the first thing that I tell patients on their consult is, hey, here's the limitation of working with me. I am cisgender. That is a huge limitation. I want you to know that, that's at the forefront. And I wish that we could have a transgender individual clinician, someone within our clinic to at least make that space feel like more inclusive. But in the therapy room itself, it's just me. And that is a huge limitation. So sometimes saying that to patients, makes them feel better. Just knowing that what I say is completely rooted in privilege of being a cisgender clinician, right? And
And
knowing that,
and knowing that you value their experience and you feel somehow inadequate to address their experience. Just communicating that you value their experience is huge for people who have had their experiences devalued. So I would imagine that they would love that.
I hope. I really do hope. It's, and I've had patients tell me that, they really appreciate hearing that. So I keep doing it, and I feel the need to do it. Because I think that's where it starts, just talking about that big elephant in the room. In terms of other types of safety, I make it known to them, Unfortunately, our institution still sometimes will list a dead name because of legal reasons on some of the documentation, not all, just due to insurance if there wasn't a legal name change. So, just making all that known, I think just because it could be triggering, could be traumatizing. So I don't want to do that. And I just want patients to be aware. And in terms of singing voice, same thing. I want the patients to know that therapy session is great. It's a safe space. My biggest thing for working with singers and with the speaking voice too, I can't help you if you don't fall. I want to see patients fall in the room, right? Like not physically fall, but
I got you. Yeah.
saying that for listeners. But if they don't make the dysphonia, right? If the dysphonic voice doesn't come out, we can't really address it, right? So sometimes if they're trying to be perfect, it's you can't generalize that all the time, right?
Yeah, blunder with boldness, do it.
yeah, that's a great way of putting it too.
I'm telling you, Kristen has the best lines. Like,
oh, I know, Kristen.
I still need to make T-shirts.
I told Geneva at my ASHA concert, at my ASHA presentation, I actually used a quote of yours.
What?
Lift as you climb. He said, "Lift as you climb."
Yeah, I was listening to the podcast as I was on the plane there.
Oh
and
my gosh.
yeah, and
that that was stolen. That's actually from
I researched it. Yeah, it's all good.
Advocacy group, and I believe actually like of women of color, like it was their thing.
Yes.
So, but I didn't know
it's
that.
still their thing, and we did cite them in the first episode.
Oh,
that's right. Yes, I had heard a woman say that, and I was like, "That's the energy. That's it." Like we want to keep moving ahead, and we want everybody, as opposed to I'm going to hold you back so I can get ahead. It's like I'm going to get ahead, I'm going to pull you up, and when you get ahead, you pull me up, and like let's just go.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
I'm so smart to think of it. Yeah.
I literally made it one whole slide to like almost end my talk. So I really owe it to you. And owe it to the founders of that quote.
The founder, yes, exactly. Oh my goodness. Well, Sean, one of the things that I love when you're talking about your work is this might not be exactly how you would phrase it, but in my perspective of looking at it is like making sure that person in front of you feels seen. And what is more important than being seen? It is like the human heart is just longing for that, like see and value, and I feel like that oozes out of your work. And to have a singer or a patient come in and feel seen, and then once that happens, there's going to be trust, and then we can move. And, it's all about freeing up that voice to say what we need to say in the world. So I love this. This is great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm sure we're all like in that bubble, right? You have to pop that bubble. We have to get it out there, right?
Yeah, and one of the great things about these kinds of conversation is that iron sharpens iron. So even when we all agree on something, like Sean, the way you phrased a couple things, it stretches my thinking. And Geneva, same thing. You asked some questions. I'm like, oh, and so even when we agree, we come out because of these conversations sharper, more sparkly. So I think that this is good work. This is good work that you're doing.
So Sean, you have been practicing SLP for a while now. 2 years? How long now?
Oh yeah, I guess so if you look at it that way. So like a 1 year post fellowship. So it hasn't been long, but yeah, it feels like forever.
Okay, all right. So you made the big bold decision to continue on with your doctorates. Tell me what prompted that decision.
Yeah, so if for those of you who don't know about New York, I live in the city. I live in Queens, which is like I think they call it the world city, right? You can get anything you want here, any type of food, any type of experience culturally, you could find it here in Queens. And unfortunately, I was a pandemic baby during graduate school, and I was a class of 2020 where all the voice fellowships were pulled. So I think there weren't even as much as there are now. I think now my student applied to, I think 12 last year. Yeah, insane, right? I think I think during the pandemic there were like 3 or 4.
I mean, and we're saying 12 like that's a lot, but I
Yeah.
mean, it's better than 3 or 4.
It's better than 3 or 4, right? So, I ended up at Stony Brook University Hospital. So, and it's about 50 miles away from New York City. So my drive to work every day is very long, but it's kind of like culture shock because we're in suburban, rural New York, right? Not what
Right.
you think about when you think about New York City. So of course, when you get a voice fellowship, you have to go to the voice fellowship, right? So I went to the fellowship at Stony Brook and ended up working alongside a wonderful laryngologist. We both actually started to continue the voice clinic there because the voice people just were about to retire. So so it worked out in our favor. And we were both met at a place where it wasn't as up and coming as the clinics in New York, right? We were met with some red tape, and we have wonderful teams who help us out, and we've made a lot of strides. But I think the reason why I started my doctorate was I knew I didn't want to do a PhD. I will say that off the bat. I knew it. My fiance is a PhD, and I saw the trauma he went through. It's not.
School is just traumatizing.
It's just traumatizing, right? But I also am not into research. I'm into clinical work. So I looked into a clinical doctorate, and MGH had one that would work on process development. And here I am, a fellow with not much guidance under my belt in terms of what to do in starting this type of clinic, and navigating the roads. And I figured that it would be a good place to get my feet wet. And I also started very late, in speech language pathology and voice, right? I was 30, I'm 32, I'm 32 now. And it's something that I knew I want to eventually further my career in speech language pathology. I'll always stay at Stony Brook. I think I will stay. So I just hope to make more gains in navigating administration, hopefully becoming part of the administrative team while still being a clinician. And I think that the clinical doctorate is going to help just expedite that for me, help me know the language to speak, help me know about the resources to pull from.
Right. So you were thinking more about advanced practice and leadership.
Exactly.
And you already had a taste of that setting up the clinic. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So as part of this the clinical doctorate at MGH, you put out this, which is how I became familiar with your work. You put out this really great little YouTube video that you had done on LinkedIn. And I was watching that, and I'm not a big LinkedIn person. And this just popped up in my feed, probably because someone that I know who knows you liked it or something. And I watched it, and I watched it a couple of times. I'm like, this is perfect for the podcast. So moving into our final segment, agentic practices, we usually talk about things that, free up voices. But one of our 3 major focuses for this podcast is trauma-informed voice care. And one of the tenets of trauma-informed voice care is to respond to trauma through policies, practices, and procedures. So will you tell us a little bit about this Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act? Because this is a policy that supports trauma-informed voice care. Tell us about your advocacy for this.
Yeah, so this is actually a video that I made for a course of mine about access and delivery of healthcare, right? And we were all, so I have to just say that, it's really a product of things that I never probably would have gone through in my first few years as a clinician. So the assignment was to go in, find a policy that you want to talk about, and make some type of outreach for it, make some type of call to action. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, this is something I have to invest a lot of time into. I don't know where to start with policy and procedure. I was very naive as to, and I think most of us in the clinical world and music world are, right? We don't really know about these things. We're not trained about this in graduate school. And so I did some research, and I found this this piece of oh gosh, the word is evading me. I told you.
Is it legislation?
So,
Okay.
I found it, and actually ASHA has a wonderful advocacy page where you can just go and see what is being advocated and lobbied for on the ASHA website. So I found that to be extremely helpful in, just finding information about how this is clinically relevant, how this is something that's already in motion. And ASHA actually set up a pre-made a letter to send to everyone in politics who is in charge of getting this passed along. So, this bill itself looks at how do we recruit and how do we retain, because the retainment is just as important as the recruitment, because as all of us know, college is not, it's not fun, it's not easy, and it's not cheap. It's not cheap. I'm not even talking about the tuition. When you're in a clinical program, there's, you got the books, you got to travel to your clinical placements, you have to get the attire, which is very expensive, and I'm not going to go through the trauma of that, but that, having someone tell you like you don't look professional enough, or you're not professional, is something that could worsen retainment, right? So,
Right.
the recruitment portion is great, but the retention is what's really important about, I think, this bill. So this bill looks at how do we find diverse populations, what could we set aside in terms of scholarships and funding for these populations, and how do we maintain that all throughout their studies. And it's not only looking at graduate schools, but also looking at the prerequisites, right? So finding ways to get students throughout their course of study. And this is, I'll talk about why it's important, because not everyone's a part of ASHA and not everyone's a voice therapist. But
Well, let me set you up a
oh
little
yeah,
bit. We've
yeah.
been throwing around the word ASHA a lot, and I should make it clear because not everyone is a speech pathologist who listens. So ASHA is just the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, which is the number one national association for speech language pathologists and audiologists. So all your voice specializing clinicians are in the American Speech, Language, Hearing Association, or ASHA. And so the one thing that I just learned about ASHA is that only 1% of SLPs are voice specializing. 1%.
Mhm.
And of that 1%, overall in ASHA, you would say maybe 3.5% of speech language pathologists are African American or Black American, and under 8% are BIPOC individuals.
Mhm.
Okay. So there's not much representation within the field of speech language pathology of the diverse populations that make up the United States. I suspect that BIPOC representation within the voice specialty is even lower than, and I
Oh
know
God.
you're encountering that. And so this is why a bill like this is exciting to me, because as goes the representation, so goes the embracing from the population in general. So, for example, let me make that a little bit clearer. When a young girl sees, that the First Lady of the United States was Michelle Obama, she can now have that dream in her mind. Oh, I could be the First Lady. Or now that we have our Vice President as African American slash Indian, BIPOC individual, young girl might say, oh, one day I'll be, And so that's why we say representation matters. So a bill like this that is designed to increase or maintain representation is so very important. Talk to us some more about that.
Yeah, and
I probably took your
it's
thunder.
yeah, because when we go to some of our conferences, right, like the Fall Voice Conference, which has a lot of the voice specializing speech language pathologists, teachers, and laryngologists and ENTs, there aren't a lot of colored people in the room. I remember I remember locking eyes with someone of color, like who I didn't know, and I was just like, I don't know this person. That's weird, right? So I made my way over and I introduced myself, because you really know all the colored people within voice. It's We're all a family, even though we barely see one another, even though we don't even talk to one another, right? We were like, oh, I know you, I see you, right?
And voice, I mean, in fairness, voice is that way in general because voice is only 1%, so everybody knows everybody. But it's even more so, right? When you're
Yeah.
when you're a
So that
minority.
being said, I'll talk about specifically with voice why I think this bill is really important.
Hmm.
When we get someone who is not English speaking in the voice clinic, when we see them for a consult in voice clinic, technically, I I don't want to see someone who is not English speaking. It's not ethical for me to do that because the sounds, the voicing patterns, they're all different across languages. So I refer out whenever I have someone who is Spanish speaking. And of course, if the patient is unable to meet someone who is Spanish speaking because of distance, because of some other barrier, I will see that patient because they should have an option. But it should be provided by someone who speaks their language because voice and language are dysphagia. I feel like you can get away with it, right? Swallowing problems, you can get away with it, but not so much with voice. And I'm referring a lot of patients, I think a few a month. And it sucks, right? No one wants to say, hey, we unfortunately think that you would be better off with this therapist, right? Because then that requires a whole new consult, a whole new evaluation. It's a barrier to care within itself.
Right.
And it's hard because a lot of the Spanish speaking therapists are in New York City, 50 miles away, and their only option is teletherapy. And not every patient wants to go through teletherapy, especially the older patients and the singing voice therapy patients, right? So that being said, that is only one example out of a plethora of examples.
It's good to
Um,
have the option, but like you
it's
said, in the New York City area, you have an option at least.
an
In
option,
other parts of the country, there is no option. There's
no
not
option.
the diversity. So, that's why I like trauma informed care because it helps people to build some of the cultural competence, cultural humility needed to
Mhm,
work with people in a way that's not re traumatizing or
mhm.
triggering. But there are, like you said, specific skills around culture and language and patterns within the culture and language that people should know when they're treating someone.
I think so. And I also think for the clinicians, when we think about trauma-informed care and we think about graduate students, when we think about students who are going through the program, who are looking at students who are not like them, there's already a sense of othership, right?
Right.
And othering. And this bill also, I think, sets up mentoring, right? So there's mentoring of students by mentors, right? People who can actually aid them through emotionally the program. And when you think about trauma, when we think about the way that the body responds to trauma and the way that carries into sometimes the therapy room, right? A, a patient could be, I'm sorry, a clinician could be triggered as well. We don't know a
Yes.
clinician's story. We don't know who, even though we're going in for a therapy session, there are opportunities for triggerings and
Right.
triggerings. I'm making up words left and right. But it's important for us to know how to navigate those things and to know that, hey, here are my resources. This was my mentor in college, in graduate school. I'm giving them a call. I've
Right.
done that. I've done that because it's you have those days where you just need to reach out.
And having the social support of someone who has a similar lived experience or who has had experiences, even your experience, Kristen, where you said you felt othered because you were the 30-year-old in the 20-year in the room full of 20-year-olds, having that experience helps you to relate and be able to show more compassion and understand where the person is coming from.
But what's great
And
about it is it violates your expectation, and then you have to do other kinds of thinking based on things like that. So yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is great, Sean, and I love how you were like, "How am I going to do this advocacy?" And you made the YouTube video, you distributed it on LinkedIn, and now you have another opportunity to talk about it. So, is there anything else that you want to say about this bill before we kind of start wrapping up?
Go to ASHA. Go to ASHA. In the show notes, you'll find my video. There's a link that you can click on to get that letter out to the people who are important, who can be a game changer. But guess what? You're a game changer too. Every one of us, we're game changers, right? If you put that hat on, you have the ability. And I think that, doing something like this, even though it's a school assignment, I'm galvanized, right? So, I think just starting it once, you kind of get your feet wet and you're kind of just like, oh gosh, got to get this Duracell battery back in, right? Because it opens up doors for you that you didn't think that you could open. Put in maybe about 5 hours of time. See if you can make something like this, and see if you could just make a Facebook post, right? That take 20 minutes. But check out the ASHA advocacy page. Any SLPs out here who are familiar with ASHA, I think that's something that's right there at our fingertips, that if it's important to you, just share it, right?
That's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
I love this modeling of how to be a trauma-informed clinician, Advocate for policies is a really big part of trauma-informed care, because it's the policies that shape the environment that we all live in,
Yes.
so that the environment can be safe. So this is wonderful.
Yeah. And even, I might add one more thing in, like even looking at your own policies at work.
Mhm.
I had no idea about mine and where to find them until I started doing some digging, and I did, and I made edits to them, just to be more inclusive to our gender diverse populations. You can start there, right? It sounds scary, procedures and policies. It sounds scary, so I don't blame anyone who agrees. But it's something that you could change right now as a clinician, as a voice teacher within your own facility. Look at your policies and look at the biases that may have been there when they were written, and see if you could change them to make them more inclusive if possible.
Yes, and whenever we think about policies, we should think, in this policy, is there any way for me to exclude or limit or create a barrier for vulnerable populations,
Mhm.
because they have a hard time breaking in? So that's really, really good advice. Always think about exclusivity when it comes to policies.
Oh yeah.
Inclusivity.
Yeah. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, so just to sum up, in this episode, we talked with Sean Moonsammy about intersectionality, representation, and responding to trauma through policies. The Allied Health Workforce Diversity Act of 2021 is designed to increase representation of underrepresented groups within the rehabilitation professions, such as speech language pathology, among others. Thank you so much for bringing this important work to light, Sean. To our listeners, you can find links to Sean's work in our show notes. We wish you all a happy holiday season. We're going to take a brief intermission and we'll record more episodes of the Agentic Voice Podcast in January after the new year. So take care.